Once upon a time, in the heart of a beautiful kingdom, there was a village called Saadu. The village was surrounded by tall, green trees and beautiful rivers. In this village, there lived a young, beautiful girl named Bira. Bira was the only child of her parents, and they loved her so much. They gave her everything she wanted: new clothes, sweet treats, and even shiny shoes. Bira's house was full of all the things that made her happy. Because of this, Bira felt very special. She liked to tell her friends, "My parents are the best. They give me everything. No one has parents as lovely as mine." Bira had many friends, but she wasn't always kind to them. She liked to boast and show off the things she had. When her friends came to play, she would say, "Look at what my parents got me. Isn't it beautiful?" And her friends would nod, even though it made them feel a little sad. Bira's friends liked her, but they noticed that she didn't care much about how they felt. She was more interested in telling them about her new shoes or pretty clothes. Even though Bira had a good heart, she didn't always remember to be kind to others. And so, little Bira lived happily in her big bright house, surrounded by all the things she loved, but not realizing that her words could sometimes hurt the people around her. Bira was a lucky girl, but she had some bad habits. Even though her family was good and kind, Bira wasn't always nice. She started to think she was better than everyone else because of all the nice things her parents gave her. She became a little arrogant, which means she thought too much of herself and too little of others. When Bira was with her friends, she would often say, "My parents gave me this beautiful dress. Isn't it the best? I bet your parents don't give you such nice things." She liked to show off and make her friends feel small. Her favorite thing was to talk about how great her parents were. "My parents are the richest in the village," she would say, with a proud smile. "They give me everything I ask for." At first, her friends listened, but soon they started to feel unhappy. They didn't like how Bira always talked about herself and didn't care about them. Bira didn't notice that her friends were growing tired of her words. She was too busy thinking about herself and her shiny new things. So, while Bira kept showing off and talking about how wonderful her life was, her friends began to feel sad. They didn't like the way Bira made them feel, but Bira didn't see it. She thought everything was just fine, not knowing that her behavior was starting to push her friends away. One sunny day, Bira was playing with her friend Gina. Gina was a sweet girl, just as beautiful as Bira, but her family was poor. Gina's parents worked very hard, but they often struggled to find enough food or buy nice clothes for Gina. Sometimes, Gina would come to play with Bira, wearing old, worn-out clothes, and Bira noticed. But instead of being kind to Gina, Bira made fun of her. "Gina, why do you always wear the same dress?" Bira asked with a smirk. "Maybe your parents didn't work hard enough when they were younger. Maybe they were too lazy. That's why they're poor now." Gina's face turned red with embarrassment, but she didn't say anything. She just stood there, feeling sad and hurt by Bira's words. Bira didn't stop there. Whenever she was with her other friends, who didn't have as much as she did, she would tease them too. If they were hungry, Bira wouldn't share her food. Instead, she would say, "Go ask your parents for food. You can't eat what my parents worked hard to give me." At first, Bira's friends didn't say anything. But as time went on, they started to stay away from her. They didn't like how Bira treated them. One by one, her friends began to leave, finding comfort in each other instead of Bira's company. Bira didn't understand why her friends were leaving. She thought they were just jealous of her and didn't realize that her unkind words were driving them away. So, Bira continued to boast and tease all alone as her circle of friends grew smaller and smaller. In the peaceful village where Bira lived, there was an old and kind king. He had ruled the village for many, many years, and everyone loved him because he cared for the people like they were his own children. The king always made sure there was peace, and he helped the villagers whenever they needed it. One day the king became very sick, and soon after he passed away. The whole village was filled with sadness. People cried and gathered to remember the good things the king had done. They spoke of his kindness and how he always treated everyone with respect. The village was quiet, and there was a deep sorrow in the air. But in Bira's house, things were different. Instead of mourning, Bira's family was secretly happy. They knew that Bira's father was the next in line to become the king. This meant that soon, their family would be the most important in the entire village. Bira's parents whispered excitedly to each other, planning for the big day when Bira's father would be crowned the new king. "In just 7 days, I will be the king," Bira's father said with a smile, "and our family will be the most powerful in the village." Bira was excited too. She couldn't wait to be the daughter of the king, the princess of the village. She imagined all the new things she would have, and how everyone would treat her with even more respect. So, while the village was mourning the loss of their beloved king, Bira's family was preparing for a celebration. They didn't feel the same sadness as the others because they were too focused on the new life of luxury and power that awaited them. Bira's family quietly celebrated, counting down the days until Bira's father would be crowned. For them, it was a time of joy, even though the rest of the village was still in sorrow. As the days passed, Bira's father was crowned the new king, and Bira became the princess of the village. Her old friends who had stopped playing with her started to come back. They wanted to be close to the new princess, thinking it would bring them respect and maybe some gifts. But Bira, instead of welcoming them kindly, became even more boastful. "My father is the king now," Bira would say, her nose in the air. "You should all listen to me. I'm not just Bira anymore. I'm Princess Bira, and I must be treated with respect." Her friends who had hoped to be close to her again found themselves being ordered around. Bira demanded more from them, making them fetch water or carry her things. She enjoyed feeling important and powerful, and she didn't notice that her friends were starting to feel uncomfortable again. Instead of learning from the past, Bira became more demanding. She liked being the princess, and she liked having everyone do things for her. Her arrogance grew, and she didn't see that her friends were only staying close because of her new title, not because they truly liked her anymore. And so, Bira's life as a princess began, filled with pride and power, but still missing the true friendship she once had. Now that Bira was a princess, her arrogance grew even bigger. She felt powerful and important, and she wanted everyone to know it. Bira began to treat her friends and the villagers like they were her servants. She would say, "You must do what I say. I am Princess Bira, and you must respect me." Bira would make her friends do all kinds of chores for her. "Fetch me water from the river," she would order. "Carry my things, and don't drop them." Her friends, who wanted to stay close to the princess, obeyed, but they didn't like it. They missed the days when they could just play together without being told what to do. Bira's demands didn't stop there. When she was hungry, she would make the maids feed her. "My fingers are too good to touch food," she would say. "You feed me now." And when she walked through the village, she made everyone bow to her, even those much older than her. "Bow your heads when you see me," she would shout, and the villagers, though unhappy, would do as she asked. The people in the village began to talk among themselves. They were not happy with the way Bira was behaving. They would whisper, "She is so arrogant. This is not how a princess should act." But they were afraid to say anything to her or her father, because Bira's father, the new king, supported her actions. Whenever someone tried to complain, the king would say, "Bira is the princess. She deserves your respect. Do not question her authority." And if anyone dared to speak out too much, the king would have them locked up in the cell without food or water. The villagers felt trapped. They didn't like how Bira treated them, but they couldn't do anything about it. So, Bira continued to rule with arrogance, thinking she was the most important person in the village. She didn't see how her behavior was hurting others, and she didn't realize that the respect she demanded was not real respect, but fear. One quiet night, while the village was asleep, something unexpected happened. Bira's father, the king, passed away in his sleep. When the news spread the next morning, the village was filled with sadness. The people mourned the loss of their king, but there was also another feeling mixed with the sorrow, a sense of relief. The villagers had grown tired of how Bira treated them, and with the king gone, they hoped things might change. According to the village's tradition, when a king who has no son dies, all his wealth must be divided among the people. This meant that Bira's family would lose their riches, and the power they held over the village would be gone. Soon, the village elders gathered to decide how to share the king's wealth. They divided his land, his cattle, and all his riches among the villagers. Bira and her mother were left with only a small portion. Just like everyone else, the grand palace they lived in was no longer theirs, and they had to move to a much smaller home. Bira, who had once been the proud and powerful princess, suddenly found herself just like the others in the village. Her days of being carried on shoulders, fed by maids, and treated like royalty were over. The villagers, who had once feared and obeyed her, now looked at her with different eyes. For Bira, this was a nightmare come true. She had never imagined losing everything so suddenly. The wealth and power she had taken for granted were gone, and she was no longer the princess of the village. The life she had known was over, and a new, much harder life was beginning. With her father gone and her family's wealth distributed among the villagers, Bira's life turned upside down. The grand palace where she once lived was no longer hers, and the life of luxury she had always known disappeared. Bira struggled to adjust to her new reality. At first, Bira tried to continue living as she had before. She quickly spent the small portion of her father's wealth that was given to her, buying fancy clothes and treating herself to nice things. But the money didn't last long, and soon Bira found herself with nothing left. Without her riches, Bira's life became very difficult. She didn't know how to live without luxury, and she didn't know how to take care of herself. She had no servants to do her chores, no maids to cook her food, and no one to carry her around. She had to learn to do everything on her own, and it was not easy. As the days went by, Bira's situation grew worse. She ran out of food and had nothing to eat. Desperate, Bira decided to ask her old friends for help. But when she knocked on their doors, hoping for a kind word or a piece of bread, she was met with cold stares. "Why should we help you, Bira?" they asked. "You never helped us when we were hungry. You made fun of us and told us to go ask our parents for food. Now it's your turn to feel what it's like to have nothing." Bira was shocked and hurt by their words, but she couldn't argue. She knew they were right. She had treated them badly when she had everything, and now they were treating her the same way. No one wanted to help Bira, and she began to understand how much she had hurt others with her arrogance. Day by day, Bira's life became more difficult. She had no food, no friends, and no one to turn to. She wandered through the village, feeling more alone than ever before. The once proud princess had fallen from grace, and now she was just another poor girl in the village, struggling to survive. Just when Bira thought her life couldn't get any worse, tragedy struck again. Her mother, the only family she had left, passed away suddenly. Now Bira was an orphan, with no one to care for her and no place to call home. The little portion of comfort she had was gone, and Bira was left completely alone. The villagers, who remembered how Bira had once treated them, didn't show her any kindness. They treated her harshly, recalling the days when she was arrogant and unkind. "This is what happens when you look down on others," they whispered among themselves. They believed Bira was getting what she deserved, so they offered no help. Bira, who had once been a princess with everything, now had nothing. She was no longer treated with respect or even pity. Instead, the children in the village began to bully her. They called her names, pushed her around, and laughed at her misery. "Look at the princess now," they would mock. "She's just like us, but worse." Bira tried to defend herself, but she was too weak and too sad. She realized now how wrong she had been to treat others the way she did, but it was too late. No one wanted to hear her apologies. The villagers didn't care about her cries for forgiveness. They only remembered the pain she had caused them, and they were not ready to forgive. Alone and destitute, Bira had to fend for herself. She had no food, no shelter, and no one to turn to. She wandered the village, hoping someone might show her a little kindness, but all she found were closed doors and cold hearts. Bira had fallen from the highest place in the village to the very lowest, and now she understood the true meaning of loneliness and regret. Bira's life grew darker with each passing day. The bullying never stopped. Every time she went to the village square, the children would tease her, push her, and call her names. The villagers, who once admired her beauty and wealth, now turned their backs on her. She had no friends, no food, and no one to help her. Bira's heart was heavy with sadness. She felt like there was no way out of her misery. She was too proud to beg for food, even though her stomach ached with hunger. She tried to ask for forgiveness, but the villagers only laughed at her. They didn't care about her tears or her pleas. They believed Bira was getting what she deserved, and they didn't want to hear her apologies. As the days went by, Bira's hopelessness grew. She felt like there was no reason to keep going. The pain in her heart was too much to bear, and she couldn't see any light in her future. Bira decided that she couldn't live like this anymore. She wanted to end her suffering. One quiet night, when everyone in the village was asleep, Bira made a plan. She found a rope and went to the village square. Under the big baobab tree, where everyone would see her, she tied the rope to a branch. She placed a bench under the tree and stood on it, ready to push it away and end her life. As Bira stood there, tears streaming down her face, she thought about everything that had led her to this moment. She thought about her parents, her friends, and all the mistakes she had made. She felt alone, abandoned, and worthless. She closed her eyes, ready to push the bench away, when suddenly she heard a voice. "Bira, Bira, wake up," the voice called out. It was a voice she recognized. Bira opened her eyes in shock, her heart pounding. The voice was so clear, so real. She looked around, but there was no one there. The village was quiet, and the only sound was the gentle rustling of the leaves in the baobab tree. "Bira, wake up," the voice called again, and this time Bira felt a strange sensation. It was like a jolt, pulling her back from the edge of the bench. She stumbled back, her heart racing, and then everything around her seemed to fade away. The next thing she knew, she was waking up in her bed, drenched in sweat, with her father standing over her, gently shaking her awake. Bira woke up with a start, her heart pounding in her chest. She was drenched in sweat, her hands trembling. She looked around, confused and scared, trying to make sense of what had just happened. Then she saw her father, standing beside her bed, looking worried. "Bira, are you all right?" he asked gently. Bira couldn't believe her eyes. Her father was alive. She was still in her room, surrounded by all the things she loved. It had all been a dream, a terrible, frightening dream. Bira felt a wave of relief wash over her. She hadn't lost everything. She hadn't been left alone and bullied. It was just a dream, but it had felt so real. As the fear began to fade, Bira started to understand the meaning of her dream. It had shown her what could happen if she continued on her arrogant path. She saw how her pride and unkindness could lead to her losing everything: her friends, her family, and even her own happiness. The dream was a warning, and Bira knew she needed to change. Filled with gratitude for the second chance she had been given, Bira jumped out of bed and ran outside. She found her friends who were playing nearby, and with tears in her eyes, she said, "I'm sorry. I've been so mean and unkind. I promise I will change. Please forgive me." Her friends were surprised by her sudden change of heart, but they could see that Bira was sincere. They forgave her and welcomed her back with open arms. From that day on, Bira was a different person. She became a kind and caring girl, always ready to help others and share what she had. Whenever she saw someone in need, Bira remembered the dream and how it had taught her the importance of kindness. She helped her friends with their chores, shared her food, and treated everyone with respect. The villagers noticed the change in her, and they began to admire her once again. Not because she was the daughter of the wealthiest man in the village, but because she had a good heart. Bira had learned a valuable lesson: that true happiness doesn't come from wealth or power, but from being kind and caring to others. She vowed never to let the dream come true, and she kept that promise for the rest of her life, living as a beloved girl who was not only beautiful on the outside but also on the inside. I hope you enjoyed the tale. If so, please like the video, share it with your family and friends, comment on it, and don't forget to subscribe to the channel and turn on the notification bell for more enchanting tales like this one. Goodbye.